The atmosphere in Washington in mid-July has a way of weaponizing heat. Outside it's the weather. Inside it's the politics. On this afternoon, the Hart Senate office building felt like both. The hearing room was oversubscribed and overcaffeinated, an aisle clogged with staffers clutching binders, a press row bristling with long lenses, and the implacable red tally light of C-SPAN blinking like a metronome for the nation's attention. This was billed as a routine oversight session marking 6 months of Kash Patel's tenure as FBI Director, Budget and Housekeeping. As one staff note put it, but the choreography signaled something else. Routine hearings do not draw overflow crowds or portable light kits. Routine hearings don't trend before the gavel drops. On the dais, Senator Adam Schiff had cultivated exactly this pressure. For 3 weeks his staff had run a war room with military discipline, opposition research, media prep, and a document apparatus so extensive it took on its own mythology. 23 binders, indexed, cross-referenced, tabbed by color and topic, were stacked within arm's reach behind his chief of staff, Brian Martinez. Internally they called it the kill box, a term borrowed from battlefield doctrine, a defined zone in which the target is fixed and finished by overlapping fires. The political translation was straightforward: trap Patel inside a lattice of prior statements, personnel moves, and procedural changes, then detonate an avalanche of facts, calibrated to look apolitical but feel fatal. Schiff's narrative architecture was equally clear. The intended arc did not cast Patel as a reformer confronting a captured bureaucracy. It cast him as a partisan wrecking ball, Trump's revenge director. The staff shorthand, bulldozing norms, purging professionals, and converting the nation's premier law enforcement agency into a political instrument. In that frame, everything becomes self-incriminating. Removals of senior agents read as retaliation. Process changes read as cover. And budget asks read as power grabs. The binders were the props, the storyline was the theater, the performance was set. Patel, when he took his seat, looked aggressively unremarkable. No entourage, no theatrics, a single thick folder placed squarely before him, where Schiff radiated prosecutorial energy, chin high, lips set, cadence rehearsed. Patel projected a studied flatness, the unflashy confidence of a witness who anticipated the questions because he had helped write the test. That mismatch, performance heat versus documentary cool, would become the afternoon's controlling dynamic. Schiff's opening aimed to anchor perception. Label first, argue later. He used the phrase, political purge, a term with just enough historical freight to make any subsequent defense feel like rationalization. As rhetorical strategy, anchoring is powerful. The first frame introduced becomes the yardstick for all subsequent evidence. He then moved to cadence, short clauses, rising intonation, the familiar scaffolding of righteous oversight, inviting the gallery and the cameras to hear the exchange not as discovery but as indictment. From a production standpoint, it was sound. Tight shots on the senator's face, B-roll of the binders, cutaways to Patel's disciplined stillness. But hearings work on 2 levels, the performative and the evidentiary, and the second level can boomerang if the witness refuses the script. Patel did not challenge the label, he challenged the premise that the label came before the facts. 12 agents removed, he said evenly, then paused. The silence forced attention to the verb, removed, not purged, when he followed with a why, 3 for selling classified material to Beijing, 4 for paid media leaks, 5 for fabricating evidence. He flipped the vector of moral gravity. The room heard a counter-narrative in the language of receipts. The thud of a document stack on the table, signed, witnessed, notarized confessions, was less sound effect than signal. We can play theater, but we are prepared for court. Why did that land? Because in modern oversight politics, credibility is asymmetric. A polished speech can be dismissed as partisan flourish. A time-stamped bank transfer frustrates dismissal. The audience, senators, staff, cameras, the country, instinctively calibrates which side is assuming they can persuade with tone and which side is insisting they can prove with paper. Schiff's preparation maximized control over narrative flow. Patel's preparation maximized control over evidentiary weight. When the former meets the latter, the camera often follows the heavier object. It is worth dwelling on the binders, The killbox, because they embody a broader phenomenon in Washington. The belief that volume is proof. 23 binders read as inevitability. They also risk reading as overcompensation if the underlying facts don't bite. The media consultant who trained Schiff's expressions for close-ups was solving the wrong problem. Facial choreography can set the mood, but it cannot survive a contrary exhibit. In hearings, the most devastating line isn't a zinger. It's, "Let me direct your attention to tab 12." The structure of the exchange also illustrated a basic law of political theater: pace is a weapon. Schiff pushed tempo, stacked accusations, layered insinuations, moved quickly to long-planned beats designed to pin Patel before the witness could contextualize. Patel slowed tempo, clarified terms, placed precise numbers, used deliberate pauses to widen the viewer's field of consideration. When he corrected the record, 13. Actually, one arrested at 6:47 a.m. this morning, he married pace control to freshness, asserting that his file was not only thick but live. That kind of contemporaneity nullifies the old news defense and, more subtly, erodes the premise that the inquisitor is most in the know. There is a meta lesson here about the modern hearing as content factory. Oversight is no longer a PDF published at dusk. It is a sequence edited in real time for feeds and reels. Staff's script set pieces that can be clipped cleanly for X or TikTok. Members practice the cadence that will carry in a 90-second package. But that very optimization introduces fragility. If the expected sequence breaks, if the witness flips roles and becomes the methodical prosecutor while the senator is reduced to reaction, the clipped moment belongs to the other side. And virality tends to prefer reversals to straight lines. In this tableau, Schiff had designed for humiliation, but Patel had prepared for inversion. The senators practiced size, the head tilt calibrated to communicate weary patriotism. None of it could survive the physical presence of notarized admissions. In an earlier era, a chairman might have interceded to restore the proceedings' order. In the social video era, the chairman's gavel is an almost quaint artifact. The camera's gavel is the cut. Why was the room so primed to pivot? Because the stakes were presented, from the outset, as normative. Is the FBI being corrected or corrupted? Purge versus reform is not merely semantic. It asks the audience to choose whether institutional trust is protected by stasis or by painful housekeeping. In that frame, facts about individual removals matter less for their tally than for their typology. Selling secrets to a hostile power, leaking for money, fabricating evidence. These are categories that reorder the conversation from, "How dare you remove them?" to, "How did they get there?" The instant that question takes root, the killbox's geometry changes. The target moves. None of this is to say the performative dimension is irrelevant. Schiff's first 5 minutes did precisely what they were designed to do: force Patel to articulate and own the removals, to plant the purge label in the transcript, to set a tone of prosecutorial scrutiny. But the hearing's center of gravity left rhetoric the moment Patel set down physical proof. The camera's long glance at the signatures and seals was not incidental. It was the visual confirmation demanded by a skeptical public that has been trained, over cycles of scandal and counter-scandal, to distrust adjectives and privilege nouns. There is also an institutional politics subtext that experienced viewers felt immediately. Personnel moves are where congressional influence and bureaucratic culture collide. Schiff's plan required painting Patel's staffing actions as ideologically motivated. Patel's rebuttal, by foregrounding criminal or unethical conduct, implicitly questioned how such actors had come to hold access in the first place. That is the kind of doorway that can swing back into the Senate itself. Because senior placements rarely occur in a vacuum. If the story becomes not, "Why did you remove them?" but, "Who vouched for them?" then what began as an assault on the witness morphs into a discovery about the inquisitor. We will see that pivot manifest explicitly later in the session. It is foreshadowed here by Patel's composure and by the way he lets the documents speak just long enough to suggest there is more paper than time. From a systems lens, the opening act also sketches the reform debate that will animate the remainder: transparency versus sources and methods. Patel's hinted posture, publishing FISA applications after a defined interval, normalizing declassification absent live jeopardy, threatens the old equilibrium that allowed process opacity to mask malfeasance under the noble banner of national security. For staffers raised in that equilibrium, a director who treats sunlight as default is not merely inconvenient, he is subversive. That normative collision explains why this hearing could never be routine. No matter the subject line on the notice, it was designed as a referendum on who gets to say what the Bureau is. Finally, note the emotional arc. The packed room's early appetite for a political takedown gives way, quickly, to a quieter, more unsettled attention. Reporters who came prepared to live tweet condemnations begin typing numbers and names. Senators who expected to surf the majority's momentum stare down at printed exhibits. Even the cameras linger longer on hands and paper than on faces. That shift in gaze is instructive. When a proceeding crosses from theater to evidence, viewers instinctively adopt juror posture. They want chronology. They want documents. They want, if not certainty, then verifiable friction against which to test talking points. Schiff wanted a moment, and in one sense he got one. It just wasn't the one his team storyboarded. The opening exchange resorted the hierarchy of proof in the room. And once a hierarchy reorders, it is hard to recover narrative primacy with voice alone. In Act 1, that is the whole story, a meticulously staged prosecution collides with an unflappable, document-driven defense, and the room decides which gravity to orbit. The rest of the hearing will be the slow consequence of that choice. The gavel fell once, echoing against the marble walls like a countdown. The live caption on C-SPAN read, "Senate Oversight Hearing, FBI Accountability under Director Kash Patel." At that instant, every camera in the room turned toward the two men at the center of the table. Adam Schiff, jaw squared, radiated the confidence of a man certain the story would unfold on his terms. Kash Patel, hands folded lightly before him, looked almost serene, too calm, as if he already knew where the script would break. Schiff opened with practiced gravity. "Director Patel," he began, voice steady but sharp, "before we discuss your budget request, I want to talk about what many inside the Bureau are calling your political purge." The words landed like a headline, crafted for instant pickup by reporters who were already live tweeting each syllable. 12 senior agents removed in 6 months. He continued, all of them veterans, many with distinguished service records. Isn't this retribution disguised as reform? For a moment Patel didn't answer. He let the question hang until even the rustle of notebooks ceased. Then, in the same flat tone one might use to recite a case number, he said, 12 agents removed. Yes, Senator. Would you like to know why? The rhythm of the room shifted. Schiff, expecting a defensive speech he could interrupt, simply nodded. 3 sold classified information to Beijing. 4 leaked to the media for money. 5 fabricated evidence. Here, Patel said, placing a folder on the table, are their confessions, signed, witnessed, and notarized. The word confessions had weight. Reporters froze mid-keystroke. Even the photographers, trained to capture motion, paused on the frame. The click of the folder against the wood was louder than it should have been. Schiff tried to recover the tempo. Those are allegations, he said, reaching for the authority of procedure. Confessions, Senator, Patel corrected quietly, meeting his eyes. Would you like to read them aloud? Or shall I? That single reversal, the witness inviting the interrogator to recite evidence, flipped the hearing's polarity. Schiff, momentarily disoriented, fell back to the lines he had rehearsed. You've fired a dozen agents involved in investigations touching the former president. Coincidence, Director? Patel didn't flinch. 13. Actually, he replied. We arrested one this morning at 6:47 a.m. The sentence landed like a grenade with the pin still attached. Schiff blinked, unsure whether he had misheard. Arrested? Yes, Senator, Patel said evenly. Agent Patricia Coleman, charged with selling operational intelligence to the Chinese Communist Party. The transfers began March 3 last year, $67 to a Cayman account. I can read you the routing numbers if you'd like. The gallery exhaled in a single wave. Schiff's notes, the ones calibrated for moral outrage, suddenly looked theatrical against the precision of Patel's data. The director's tone never rose. The more clinical it became, the more it cut. This is political retribution. Schiff insisted, voice rising now. Patel flipped a page. It's treason, Senator. 3 of our assets in Taiwan were executed because of those leaks. Would you like their names for the record? The hearing room went still again. Every politician fears the silence that follows a fact too brutal to argue. Schiff glanced down at his binder, searching for a prepared line that could neutralize dead agents. There wasn't one. Patel continued methodically. Agent Driscoll, $50,000 from CNN. Consulting fees. He called them. We call it selling classified information. January 12th. Payment received. January 13th. CNN runs an exclusive about our Detroit counterterrorism unit. I assume you saw that report. Senator, you retweeted it. A ripple moved through the press seats. Reporters began scrolling through old feeds, verifying the timestamp. Whistleblowers have a right to speak, Schiff said, voice tightening. Whistleblowers don't invoice cable networks, Patel replied, his tone still measured but edged now with steel. And they don't tailor leaks to favor campaigns that share your donors. That last clause landed hard. It wasn't shouted, just placed, a stone dropped into still water whose ripples would spread long after the broadcast. Then came the coup de grace. Patel lifted another page. Agent Jennifer Boone fabricated evidence in 3 FISA applications. She altered an email that read, I hope Trump wins, to say, I hope Trump wins with Russian help. Changed the date on another message to shift the timeline. She admits it here, in writing. He slid the document toward the microphone so the camera could capture the signature. The collective intake of breath was audible even through the glass wall separating spectators from the dais. Schiff's expression faltered, not yet panic. But something close. These are isolated incidents, he said finally, almost pleading. Bad apples. Patel's reply was soft but lethal. Bad apples from your orchard. Senator, all 3 were your recommendations. That line didn't appear in any script. It was the moment when narrative control dissolved. Schiff's staff leaned in, whispering frantic updates, but Patel had already stacked 3 signed letters on the table, each bearing Schiff's looping signature. The hearing room felt less like a Senate chamber now and more like a courtroom in which the roles had inverted. The prosecutor was on defense. The witness was presenting evidence. And the jury was the American audience watching live. An analytical eye would note how swiftly credibility can collapse once documentation appears. Schiff had built his question tree around assumption, if Patel denied. Accuse, if Patel hedged. Imply guilt. But a witness armed with primary source confessions nullifies that binary. The result isn't a clash of opinions but a redefinition of what the argument is. Television captures those reversals with merciless clarity. The flicker in a senator's eyes when surprise overrides composure. The subtle shift in camera zoom as technicians recognize a viral moment forming. In that instant, the hearing stopped being an act of oversight and became a case study in the limits of performance politics. By the time Patel concluded, the energy in the room had inverted completely. Schiff's voice, once the dominant frequency, now competed with the low buzz of staffers recalculating their talking points. The gallery, sensing history, leaned forward instead of applauding. Let me be clear, Patel said finally, closing his folder but leaving it visible. We're not cleansing politics from the Bureau. Senator, we're cleansing corruption. You can decide which side of that line you stand on. He sat back, silent again, as the cameras panned from his calm expression to Schiff's rigid one. It was the end of the first exchange, and the beginning of Schiff's unraveling. By mid-afternoon, the hearing had shifted from spectacle to dissection. The audience, reporters, aides, lobbyists, no longer whispered in anticipation of sound bites. They were taking notes like jurors. What had begun as a set piece designed to showcase Senator Schiff's command of procedure was morphing into a forensic audit of his own network. Director Patel, methodical as a surgeon, began organizing exhibits on the witness table. Since we're discussing accountability, he said evenly, let's take them one at a time. Agent Patricia Coleman, Beijing Connection. He held up the first packet. Agent Patricia Coleman, 18-year veteran, Counterintelligence Division, The investigation showed a series of wire transfers from the Hong Kong-Shanghai Banking Corporation to a Cayman Islands account ending in 4,779. 14 payments. Total: $200,000. He paused, letting the numbers hang before adding the human cost. In exchange, she provided identities of 3 human assets in Taiwan. All 3 are dead. No one moved. The statement had the blunt gravity of a casualty report. Patel flipped to the next page. Here are her signed admissions. Each page countersigned by counsel. Witnessed by 2 agents. Notarized under penalty of perjury. The cameras zoomed on the signatures. The evidence was not theoretical. Schiff tried to regain control. This committee wasn't notified. You were, Senator. Patel interrupted quietly. Your staff received the sealed briefing April 12. They declined the classified session. The murmurs began again. Senators shifted uneasily. The point was not only guilt, it was negligence. Agent Michael Driscoll, media for money. Patel reached for another file. Agent Michael Driscoll, counterterrorism, payments from CNN labeled consulting. $50,000 across 10 transfers. January 12, $5. January 13. CNN publishes an exclusive quoting an unnamed senior source about a Detroit cell. February 8, another $5. February 9, another exclusive. The pattern continues for 6 months. He lifted a sheet of screenshots showing Venmo receipts. Transaction IDs visible. Not speculation. Digital record. Cross-verified by Treasury. Schiff leaned into the microphone. Whistleblowers. Director. Protected activity. Patel's reply was surgical. Whistleblowers report wrongdoing through Inspector General channels. Not through paid news contracts. The FBI supports lawful disclosure. We do not subsidize gossip for profit. The juxtaposition. Schiff invoking moral principle. Patel citing payment metadata. Illustrated the asymmetry defining the day. Rhetoric versus receipts. Even sympathetic senators sensed the imbalance. Cameras caught Senator Warren lowering her gaze to her notes. She would not interject again. Agent Jennifer Boone, fabrication as process. Patel lifted the third dossier. Agent Jennifer Boone, FISA applications. 2016. 3 instances of deliberate evidence alteration. 1 email changed from, "I hope Trump wins" to, "I hope Trump wins with Russian help." A text message timestamp shifted 4 months forward to fit a narrative of late-stage conspiracy. Another exhibit manufactured entirely. He projected the side-by-side comparisons on the hearing room screen, left column. The originals, right column. The doctored versions. The visual difference was small, just 6 inserted words, but the political effect had been seismic. She confessed? Schiff asked, his tone somewhere between disbelief and dread. Patel slid a document forward. Affidavit dated May 17. Direct quote. I falsified portions of 3 applications under direction of senior leadership. Her signature is at the bottom. Would you like to read the name she lists as senior leadership? Senator? Schiff hesitated. Is it classified? It was. Patel replied. Now it's declassified. He tapped the line with his pen. Schiff's own name stared back from the photocopy. The chamber went deathly still. The director didn't gloat, he simply continued. Your handwritten recommendation placed Boone in the FISA review team. The note reads, he glanced down, Jennifer knows how to build a case that will stick. Patel laid out 2 more letters, each with Schiff's signature. The repetition turned coincidence into pattern. The analytical undercurrent. Observers who study hearings as power rituals noted the structural inversion occurring in real time. The senator's questions, drafted to elicit defensive sound bites, were being repurposed into prompts for documentary exposition. Each answer Patel gave replaced speculation with specificity, dates, sums, signatures, that deprived rhetoric of oxygen. When data enters the record with that density, narrative collapses into chronology. Chronology is unspinnable. Politically, the shift was catastrophic for Schiff. His strategy depended on maintaining the moral frame of political interference. Patel's counter reframed every dismissal as counter-espionage, every purge as damage control. Once the frame moved from motives to crimes, the burden of proof reversed. Schiff was no longer asking why the agents were fired. He was being asked how they were hired. Tone and tempo. By now, the gallery's earlier partisan energy had drained into uneasy quiet. Even allies of Schiff realized the optics. A senator known for oratory reduced to reading from a binder that no longer aligned with reality. Patel's calm, far from robotic, came across as command. His voice rarely rose above a conversational register. Yet each sentence landed with the finality of an evidentiary exhibit. He closed the trio of files and summarized in one sentence that would lead every broadcast that night. 12 removed for cause. 1 arrested for espionage. If cleaning that house is a purge, then consider it disinfected. No applause followed, just the faint hum of air conditioning and the whir of press cameras trying to freeze the moment. In Washington, silence can be the loudest verdict.